Hello everyone. This is the first of a number of videos where I will be explaining the different systems-based methodologies that we have uncovered so far as part of our model um, for this term. So the first of these different methodologies or strategies is called interactive planning. Before I got into that part of explaining this methodology, also known as ACOS methodology, let me recall where is that we are in terms of all these different strategies or methodologies that we use in order to cope with complexity. Remember, all of you guys will be making decisions in the near future. As a manager, the main challenge is to make good decisions. And good decisions are easy to do when we have a static environment and where everybody agrees on what we want. So that is relatively easy. This is not to say it is an easy task, but it's relatively easy. Problem arises whenever there is an increase on what we call the level of complexity. And what I've been saying time and time again is complexity, according to the proposal by Professor Mike Jackson, who is the, whose work is exactly what we've been working. There are two elements or two dimensions. The first one has to do with the nature of the interaction among participants, the number of people, the complexity, the different interests, the changing or evolving objectives that people have. So, according to his proposal, his suggestions on how to deal with complexity, he classifies that interaction to have three different possibilities. If everybody agrees on what is that we want, then he says we have a unitary context. Under a unitary context, we all agree on what we want. Problem is, possibly, that we don't know how to do it. But as long as we agree, of course, we have a problem. We all agree, we want the same, but we don't know how to do it. And probably we can take the current situation we're in. At the moment, we have a pandemic, a health problem. We want to get rid of that problem. We want to go back to life as normal, but we need to take certain actions, right? If everybody agrees on what we want, that makes things easier. So we have an agreement. Now, of course, there is disagreement about how to do it. So if there is disagreement on how to do, certainly we are not in a unitary situation. We are in a pluralistic situation. A pluralistic situation occurs every time there is disagreement about what we want on how are we going to get to the state we want to be in. If there is disagreement, but we can deal with that disagreement, we can learn from each other, we can improve the situation through a process where we will be learning from each other. We are open to have a discussion, a rational and adult discussion, in order to reach a common agreement. Then you are in a pluralistic situation. Democracy is a form of pluralistic context. Under democracy, we have different ideas. Let's say the case of a political decision, we have different candidates. Each one supports one particular option, or at least one preferred option. At the end of the political or the voting process, after everybody has cast their vote, we have a winner. It doesn't mean that everybody will be happy. After an election, probably you are not happy with the result. Probably you don't like the winning party. But that's the price of democracy. That is the way we use in order to handle differences in society. Of course, we don't expect that all decisions will be based on democracy. There is some people who have to make a decision. A manager, he or she is responsible for making a decision. Of course, she or he will be accountable for the decisions he or she are making. Therefore, under a pluralistic situation, there is possibility for agreement through a dialectical process where everybody exposes, presents arguments, ponder the different arguments, and reach agreement, or whether you go straight to a voting decision. The final option, in terms of that interaction between different people, according to Professor Jackson, it can have a coercive nature. Under a coercive nature, people have different ideas about what is the problem, where we want to be, or what is the best course of action. But somebody with power imposes their preferred option. Of course, it is a different situation. Over here, probably having or casting the vote might not be the best option. Probably the people in power will not be willing to engage in debate. They have power, they impose their preferred solution. Either because they've been elected, because they are being they've been cast with the power, or because they have seized power through arms of whatever they mean that they got that power. So that could increase the level of complexity. It is not the same dealing with a situation here as it is a situation over there. The other element has to do with what Professor Jackson calls the nature of the system. And sometimes that could be misleading because it is not only the nature of the system. For instance, an organization where they have a static nature, it is actually a mechanic system. In a mechanic system, this pen, the pen will not change today as it will change in 20 years' time, right? The parts do not have purposes of their own. The contribution of the part is set, but that changes when you have a family, right? When you have two people working together, their objectives, their interests, their preferences change over time, and that increases the level of complexity. The other element is not only the nature of the system, but the nature of the environment of which the system is part. An organization, for instance, the military, is clearly an organization with a specific purpose. It tends to have an static objective. The purpose of the military is always the same, to protect the civil population, right? Or defend the interests of the nation. That is the same today as it will be probably in 10 years' time. But the military might be part of a complex environment where things are changing. You can take the case of the different world wars. At that time, the context was different. The purpose of the military is exactly the same, but the context is different. So this dimension has a dual perspective, if you want. The internal element, the purpose, the mission, the preferences of the system, how it works, how it relates to each other, of the different parts, and how the external environment changes. So, according to the proposal by Mike Jackson, it could have a static nature, where everything is basically the same. There may be a small degree of change, but not really much. A dynamic nature, things are moving, are changing, but they are moving on a continuous pattern. At least you can identify what that environment is moving like, in what direction is it moving. The third one is the problematic one. There is uncertainty, and that, again, can be better explained by the situation we're living at the moment. We don't know exactly when this health problem will stop, when things will change, what will be the consequences. And we're only talking about the health consequences. I would like to talk about things like the economic consequences of the pandemic, right? There are going to be dire consequences. There are going to be huge consequences. We are anticipating some of those effects from the health crisis, but we are not certain what those will be, right? So, again, it is not the same having a problem where the environment has a static nature as compared to a situation where there is uncertainty surrounding the situation we are at the moment. So, based on this matrix of problem context, let me make it a little bit wider, we've been reviewing some strategies how to handle situations associated with specific types of problems. The first one, if you recall, was system dynamics. And I believe, again, probably I'm extending this bit too much to the right. That's my consideration. Probably some people think it will not be as ideal in order to deal with a pluralistic problem, but I will explain why I'm moving this one further to the right. Now we had system dynamics. It is a methodology, it is a strategy aimed at increasing our understanding of a situation. Remember, we construct a model where we try to reflect on what's going on in terms of this war on drugs and try to improve our level of understanding, to see things that we are not really understandable to everybody. And remember, this is a strategy that is the problem based methodology that you need to use in order to make sense of a social problem. System dynamics, remember, is where we have this idea of causal loop diagrams, right? If you recall, we had, let's say, a variable, it could be profits, which is a function of different variables. The level of income, the higher the income, the higher the profits. And income is a function of sales and sales price. If you increase the price of your products, you have higher income. Also, if there is an increase in sales, you have higher income. However, the larger the price, there tends to be a reduction in sales. So that diagram is something you, I assume, are already familiar with and you know how to use it. Well, you are supposed to be using something like this in order to understand a social problem. That is the first of the assignments you need to do. Of course, I'll be talking about assignments in a different video. Well, that's system dynamics. The second methodology we discuss is the viable system model. The viable system model, if you recall, states that any system, and by a system is meant an electronic system, a mechanical system, an organization, a group of friends, a political party, the students' union, a family, needs to perform 5 specific functions. And also, there needs to be clear channels of communication and control. If you are living in a situation where there is uncertainty, but everybody agrees on what we want, the best thing to do is to be prepared, to have cohesion, internal cohesion, to deal with whatever the environment throws at you. If you have a clear structure, a solid structure, you are better positioned to deal with complexity. This is not to say that is an antidote to every single thing that could happen. It's just the better communication, the better the elements of control, the clearer the structures, the better position that you are. And we're seeing at the moment again is a situation where we have uncertainty, but those countries having a clearer lines of communication, better structures of communication and control, are better positioned to deal with the problem that we have as this health crisis. That was the viable system model. Again, I suggest if you have any questions, please visit all the supporting presentations that are available on Canvas, as I believe the viable system model is one of the ideal strategies, methodologies that you can use in order to solve the second assignment for the evaluation of this model. The third methodology we analyze is called SAST. And SAST system assumptions, surfacing and testing, is a really good strategy, particularly when you are dealing with a problem of pluralistic nature. Remember, under a pluralistic nature, we have different ideas of what to do, on how to do it, but there is possibility in order to reach agreement. During the third of the tutorials, I asked you to use the SAST methodology in order to deal with a very simple problem. As you are aware, there is a big controversy in economic terms on whether or not the developed world should keep providing aid to the developing world. Some people are saying, well, this is only a good way for the rich countries to save face, to justify how wealthy they are, and to feel okay, right? Kind of a charity sort of thing. But it is not actually making any change down there in the developing world. Actually, as you remember, there are people saying, well, that's aid is only a way to perpetuate corrupt officials, corrupt governments. So please stop aid. So what I asked you was, take us, take one of the sides, pro aid or against aid, and therefore I asked you to identify within the matrix that SAST uses, and place there all the assumptions, all the basis for your preferred strategy, right? So that's what you were asked to do, or to use this SAST methodology. Now, remember that was used, and it was used in order to deal with situations where more or less you can identify what situation you are in terms of the purposes of the system and its relation to the environment. Probably I went too much on this Y dimension if you want. So SAST could be an option down there. Today's methodology, interactive planning, is a good option if you are dealing with a problem somewhere here. Let me say IP. So interactive planning could be a good strategy if you're dealing with a problem which is located around this area. There are differences of opinion, difference of ideas, what the problem is, how to proceed forward. But in general, the environment is changing, the environment is moving, but at least it is moving in a direction such that you can identify where you are moving, right? There is no full of uncertainties when you don't know where things are coming. And that is one of the constraints, if you want, that you have in terms of interactive planning. It is a process aimed at creating dialogue, a debate, so that people can bend their differences and try to reach common ground. So let me go through the methodology. What I have here, in short, over there, what I have here is all the stages of the methodology. If you recall, on the last lecture we had, on this face-to-face lecture, almost a week and a half ago, I start explaining the methodology, but I didn't complete the explanation. So I will start from the beginning and go through the different stages. So the first element I have to highlight is that it is actually a planning methodology. And I would like to emphasize that. Its main aim is not only for planning, it is also about discovering, understanding, seeing what others see. But it is an ideal tool if you want to plan. And planning, and that's why I like this definition from Professor Rakoff, it says that planning increases the possibility that a non-obvious future state actually occurs. You don't need to plan to have a sunrise tomorrow. The sun is going to rise regardless of what you do. You don't need to plan for that one. All of you are a month, a month and a half away in order to finish your studies. You don't need to plan much. All you need to do is enforce control. Make sure you do what you need to do. Do your assignments, keep studying, do what you need to do, and in a month and a half, 2 months at most, you'll be granted your degree. Right? You don't need to do much planning. You, of course, need to do some planning on what is that you are going to do next. What is the ambition? Where do you want to go in the future? What is your path of development? Actually, this methodology is part of what I'm asking you to use for the fourth of the tutorials. So, this planning methodology helps us to increase the chances that something that is not obvious to happen actually occurs. Remember, not because we're planning, we will get to where we want. We're only increasing those chances. The methodology is based on three principles. The first one is called the participative principles, stating that nobody can plan efficiently for anybody else. Anybody you are planning for has to be involved in the planning process, right? I cannot plan for you. I cannot determine what is best for you. Probably when we were children, little children, our parents made our decisions. Somebody made decision for us. But at the stage we're in, it is not efficient. It is not even rational for somebody to decide on what's best for us. The same occurs at a corporation level. We need everybody to be involved. The second principle, it is an iterative process. So it has to be done once you run it, and then you go and start again so that you make sure you go where you want to go. Planning is creating a path, but more often than not, our plans go other way. There are stumbling blocks. There are things that divert our direction. And that's why you need to take corrective action. So it is iterative because you need to revisit each one of the elements so that you make sure you either take the right route or probably you redefine the objective. Probably 35 years ago, when I was studying at university, I didn't foresee myself and foresaw myself on what I'm doing at the moment. Life took me to a different route. Same will apply to you. But it is important always to revisit your plans, to revisit your dreams, to revisit your actions so that you make sure you are going in the right direction. And the final element is a holistic principle stating that you need to plan for the organization as an entity, as a single whole. You cannot plan efficiently if you are only planning for parts of it. Of course, as an individual, you cannot plan for parts of your body, but in an organization, clearly you can plan for parts of them, right? Okay, let me carry on. All those stages form part of the methodology. Let me go through each one of them and I'll go then in detail. The first one is analysis of the current context. That is where we are at the moment. If you want, let me show you this graph there. The initial context or the current context is where we are at the moment. This initial condition we're in, where we are today. So in order to determine where we are today, we need to define what is that we have, what are our strengths, what are our weaknesses, what are the resources that we got, what are the abilities that we have at the moment as an organization, what is good about us, what is not as good, what are the advantages that we have, what capital do we have, human capital, relational capital, monetary capital, all the resources that we got. And this is where we are. Also important is to determine where the environment is moving today. Of course, the environment will be moving in a direction that will not be in the future. You need to take corrective action if the environment changes. Every single organization, I'm pretty sure, had a plan about 2020. All those plans are shattered. All those plans are being completely out of rail, right? They've been going somewhere else due to this coronavirus crisis. So because we have a crisis, all companies, organizations, governments, families, each one of us is adapting to a changing environment. Of course, I'm making clear it is a situation where we are having a problem associated with environment. The environment is not really dynamic. The environment at the moment is really uncertain. We're somewhere there, okay? We're inundated by uncertainty. So that makes things a little bit more complicated. Okay, the next one, the next stage is what we call the ends planning. Where do we want to go? Where do we see ourselves in 30 years' time? The long dream. Where do you see yourselves in the long-term future? So that's why I call it the desired state, right? Where do you want to be? Not tomorrow, not in a year time, in the long run. That's why it is called the S1 state. The next two stages is, if you realize, let me go back a little bit, as part of the initial stage, you try to determine what we call the logical future. So let me call it SL. This logical future state is where will you be if things stay as they are. Or if you're planning for an organization, where the organization will be if everything stays as they are. Everything stays the same. Clearly, what I've been saying is, in a few months, you'll be having your university degree, right? And you don't need to do much other than keep doing what you're doing, do your assignments, and so on and so forth. So this is where you'll be. You are going to plan only if there is a gap between where you want to be and where you'll be if things stay as they are. If there is a gap, this is when you need to plan. You need to take action in order to make sure you pass from this logical state to the desired state. And once you have identified there is a gap, then you need to identify what are the alternative courses of action. Probably the easiest one is to take the shortest route, but maybe that option is not available to you, either because you don't have the resources or because that option simply does not exist. Or you could take alternative routes, shortcuts, go around a problem that you face. So the means planning is to identify and evaluate the alternative courses of action and to choose, of course, one that you think is more efficient, or at least that meets the criteria that you determine. Probably you want to be rich, you want to be a philanthropist, help people, help your community. But in order to be rich, probably one option is to rob a bank. That is the shorter route. But it is not an option, I hope it will not be, particularly because it is not an acceptable option, right? It is feasible, might be, but it is not legal and, of course, not acceptable. The fourth state is, once you have identified what is the route you are going to follow in order to move from the logical future to the desired state, is what resources do I need? What do I need in order to move from this SL to S1? And finally, and very importantly, it is to implement those actions. And over there, I want to highlight two elements: to evaluate and take corrective action. And guys, remember, you are in the process, you are in a training process to become an efficient decision maker. And believe me, based on my experience and the people I see around myself, the best decision makers are inundated with decisions which are aimed at taking corrective action. It is difficult to face people and to evaluate people, let them know that they are not doing the right thing, and eventually to take a corrective action. When you have to fire people, it's not a really beautiful feeling, I have to say. It is beautiful to go around giving freebies to people, praising people, uh, giving away things. That's easy. The main challenge that you got as a decision maker is that more often than not, your work will involve dealing with problems, dealing with difficult people, taking corrective action, nagging people, going after the people that are not meeting what they are expected to be doing. So let me go through each one of the different stages in a little bit more detail, and probably this will help us to understand what is that you need to do. The first and state as well, analysis of the current context, it is about identifying where we are, this initial stage. And for that one, there are a number of actions that you need to meet, a number of actions you need to take. The first one is called internal analysis. So going back to this one, let me make it a little bit closer. Too much. So there are 4 stages, 4 actions that you need to take. The first one is the internal analysis. I'll take this one out. And the internal analysis is about evaluating and defining what are the strengths of the organization, the people, the company, the family you are planning for. What are the positives and what are the negatives? So this initial stage is associated with identifying the plus and minus that that organization has. So if it's planning for a company organization, you are thinking in terms of the strengths that a company has, as well as the weaknesses that an organization, a person has. What are the plus and minus? What are the good things about the company? The not as good elements. A company could have a really speed response to customer needs. A company could have a great quality, or it will be very efficient production process. A company could have a high reputation or low reputation, or they may have really good distribution network in order to take their products to the markets. Well, those are the pluses, but all those elements could represent a minus, right? If you don't have or you don't have control over distribution channels, that is a minus. If the quality of your products is not the best, of course, that is a minus. So it is listing what is good and what is bad, right? The second stage is known as obstruction analysis. It has to do with what could happen in the future that is outside of the control of the decision maker that could derail the plans that you got. It is the environmental analysis, the environmental scanning of what's going on out there. So this environmental scanning is about identifying what could happen in the future that could take our plans out of the path that we want. Clearly, there are some elements, again, today's crisis, that was not foresaw. It was not possible to identify that we will be in a situation like this. Of course, people who do analysis, who work on the strategic intelligence, all these pandemic issues were a possibility. Of course, the probability was low. But if you go to the people who works on intelligence in every single nation, a pandemic or facing a pandemic or a health crisis is always an S scenario that exists. Of course, companies do not plan for a situation as such. They probably plan for many things, not necessarily what we have at the moment. But when you have different scenarios of what could happen, what is that the environment can produce and affect us, you are in a better position even if what actually happens is none of the different scenarios you had. At least you have some plans, contingency plans in place, or at least ideas. The next stage is what we call the next action, sorry, reference projection. What will happen? Where is the environment moving forward? Clearly, the environment or in the organizational environment, things are moving in terms of 2 directions. In terms of what we call the Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, as well as the effect of social media. Social media has a vital effect in the decisions we make, from the things we consume to the things we do. So clearly, electronic marketing has a vital role for the future of companies, as much as artificial intelligence or the Internet of Things. So using all those activities, all those different components of this first state, you can create, using the 3 of them, this scenario of reference. which is the logical future. Based on the strengths that I have, based on the weaknesses that we have as an organization, as a family, as a company, as a political party, based on what is going on in the environment and the trends that we're seeing, what is the logical future? What is that we see ourselves if things move in the direction that we're seeing? Once you have completed that stage, then you will have a good idea of what that situation is. Going back to the draw that I had before, let me complete the diagram there. That one connects to the next state or next stage in the process. So using this draw that I had, this is where we are. If you want, these are the first three activities. With these three, remember you form this one here, the scenario reference, and this, if you want, this is the SL. Where will we be in the future if things stay as they are? Then you have the next stage, and that stage is represented by all these three activities. You see there are three of them: idealized design, consensus design, and comparison. The comparison stage is about comparing the design, the idealized design, the desired future, and the logical future, right? Again, it is comparing if there is a distance between this one and the one over there. If you want, this one is the product of the first stage. Let me call it stage 1. This one, this is the product of stage 2. Okay? So, let's go through that one. That stage is called ends planning. It is composed by really two activities, and the third one is the comparison stage. First of all, the first stage, it is called initial idealized design. Remember that this methodology is meant to be used by a group of people who have different ideas of what the problem is or how we can solve the problem moving forward. So, in order to get to this dialectical debate, the idea is to ask each one of those involved, where do you see our company in 20 years' time? What is the dream? If we are a family, what is the dream for us as a family? Of course, there will be individual dreams, individual desires. Well, at this stage is each one of you identify where do you see ourselves as a group of friends, as a family, as a corporation, as an organization, as an NGO, political movement, whatever. Then you try to create consensus, to identify where we are moving together. And over here, I will suggest, let me go back to my matrix for the different methodologies. If you recall, I said this SAST methodology can be used in order to build consensus. Probably a good idea is to use SAST in order to move from the idealized design to the consensus design. Imagine a couple, two people, working together where they see themselves in 20 years' time. Of course, there will be differences, or you will have as many idealized designs as you have people in the room. In order to build consensus, to reach agreement, probably you can use the SAST methodology. Why do you prefer that strategy? Why do you see this group of people moving in that direction when I see it moving in the opposite direction? What are the bases? How sure you are? So remember, the whole methodology depends on the assumption that people are willing to bend their differences and to reach agreement. If no agreement can be reached, then this is not the adequate strategy to deal with that problem. So, once you have the consensus design where we want to be, then you compare the logical future with the desired state. If there is a gap, if there is a difference between the two, this is when you need to start planning what actions do you need to put in place in order to make sure you get closer to that desired state. Remember, planning only increases the chances that the desired future actually occurs. If that desired state is likely to happen, forget about planning. Impose control, communication and control. At that point, probably the BSM methodology is a good idea. Okay? Do those 5 functions: transformation, audit, control, intelligence, and decision making. Once you have those 5 activities in place, right, probably you don't need to plan much. You have good structures of communication and control to take corrective action. No further planning is required. But assuming, yeah, there is a difference between the desired state and the logical future, this is when you have those gaps to be filled by the planning process. So as you can see in the presentation, then there is communication. The omega sign, somewhere right there, that one gets or is connected to the previous state. The product of the gap identification fills this state or this stage, which is the third one, which is referred as means planning. Means planning is relatively simple. I don't think it requires too much explanation. It simply identify what are the alternative courses of action. What options do you have in order to close the gap? What are the different routes that you got? What are the alternative routes that you can follow? And to choose the one you think is most adequate. I can go from SL to S1 and I have 3 ways to get it. I can go through the longer route, probably safer. I can use the shortcut, or I can take these different directions. Choose the one that is more important. And over there, I highlight 2 specific words: sustainable and acceptable. A situation where you define plans where the option is not sustainable, it means it cannot last over time. It might consume too much resources, or it might be consuming resources that will not last there. And the other element is the acceptable element. I already mentioned this idea about getting rich in order to be a philanthropist. Probably that's the dream. But of course, there are shortcuts that are not acceptable, or simply that are not feasible given the situations we are in. The means planning then identify the alternatives, which ones are the different routes that you can follow, and choose what you think is the most adequate one. Over there is an important element, this last element that is appearing, that sigma value, and that is let me call it a feedback loop between the options and the resources. It is highlighted here. So over here, let me make it closer. I have these alternative courses of action. Over there, I have the resources. It might be that on this 4th stage, I identified that all the resources required cannot be made available, right? Probably I'm daydreaming, or the dream is too difficult for me to achieve, right? Or those resources simply don't exist. Therefore, I need to feedback and say, okay, it's a good idea. We would love to have it, but I don't have the resources. The resources simply don't exist. So you need to feedback and probably go back to the drawing board and redefine the way to go from SL to S1, or actually go higher and redefine the dream. The 4th stage, resource planning, is composed by 3 activities. First, you need to identify what resources are required. What are the elements that you need in order to move in the direction that you want? At the same time, you can identify what resources you got. What is what you have at the moment? Maybe some of these resources are not currently available, but it will over time, like having your degree. You don't have your degree right now, but you will have it in due time. If there is a difference between what is required compared to what you got or what you are going to have, clearly this is the resource gap. Those are the resources you need to get. If those resources are not or can hardly be made available, you go back to the drawing board. Assuming you identify those resources could be attainable, could be obtained, then you proceed to the final stage, implementation and control. And remember, in that stage of implementation and control, the main element is to determine who is going to do what, define responsibilities, what will be the time frame, what are the resources each person is going to require. It's very easy to say define responsibilities, but it is not as easy. It requires a process, it requires experience. You can have a full course, a full module on how to define responsibilities, how to manage a problem, a project. Project management is a model on its own right? It's completely a science that you can use in order to manage a project. Other important element, define the measures of performance. How do you know you are on the right track? What will be the landmarks that will allow you to identify that you're moving in the right direction? Again, that is not easy. That requires, again, training, experience. But that's what you need in order to know if you're moving in the right track. Once you have all of this, of course, you can proceed to implement. But this is not where the whole process stops. That's why I highlight before, it is an iterative process. Let me make it wider. You proceed to implement and then you do again. You go again through the process of evaluating where you are. Is it moving in the right direction? Or is the logical future, after you have gone through the methodology once or twice, is the logical future what you want? Then forget about the planning. Control. So this is the methodology as explained by Russell Acuff. Of course, it is not easy. Again, requires experience. It is quite easy to explain, not as easy to actually follow. And therefore, let me give you a couple of references that you can use. Probably the main one will be Acuff's own writings, Creating the Corporate Future. This is a book that exists in the library. And the whole book is about the methodology. It explains each one of the different stages. There is plenty of examples on how to do each one of the different activities within each stage. So this is Creating the Corporate Future. Russell Acuff is the author. A good read. Acuff is a brilliant author. He writes for the general public and it is very easy to follow. The other reference, of course, is the textbook. Remember, the textbook we're using is this book, Critical System Thinking and the Management of Complexity by Mike Jackson. And Mike does a great job really in explaining each one of the different methodologies. So that could be a really good source of reference if you want to know more about the interactive planning methodology. It is actually explained in chapter number 15, and the whole chapter not only explains the methodology but also presents a critique of the weaknesses, of the challenges, of the shortcuts that you can have in order to use it. So again, those are two sources that you can use in order to complement your understanding of this methodology. As I said before, this methodology is what you are expected to use for the 4th of the tutorials. So I'm going to close this video And as soon as I'm finished with this one, I'm going to explain what the fourth tutorial is and what is that you need to do. Okay? Remember, guys, you can always reach me through my email account if you have any questions. Please stay safe, and again, let me know if you have any question. Thank you.